Hello everyone, this is Neighbor Jay from Rocket Tests, and today I'm going to be pressing a Benny Whistle rocket motor. And I'd like to discuss some of the tooling that I use and why I use it. And today there is this is a economy rocket tooling. This is designed by Caleb from Woody's Rocks, and it's originally designed to be used with black powder, but it is perfect for pressing whistle motors. It's an excellent price. I'm not sure what he's charging right now, but when I bought them, I think it was about $65 for a set. And there's some things I don't like about it, but it's still a very high quality product and I use it all the time. I suppose I can get into what I don't like about it first, and it's not even a big deal. These are the rammers that it comes with. This is the spindle. The spindle is attached to the base. It can't be disconnected. It's all one piece, which is kind of nice. The rammers are for short tubes. Pretty much all of my rockets are full-length tubes. Even if I'm just making a whistle rocket without a report on it, I still use full-length tubes, because if I gotta cut it, that's just extra time I got to spend cutting it, and then I have a scrap piece that I'm probably really never going to use anywhere else. So I just use full-length tubes, and whenever I do that, these rammers won't work. So I go into my other rocket tooling, and I find that the tooling matches from I think this is my my number one rammer for my extreme tooling, for my extreme strobe tooling, and it's a full-length rammer, and it will work with this. I needed a flat rammer to finish it off after I'm pressed up to the tip of the spindle, so I just use my end burner tooling. This is the number 2 rammer off of my 1-pound end burner rammer. So I don't really use these. They pretty much just sit on my shelf all the time. Now, this is a tube support that Caleb sells. Very nice quality. I use this thing all the time. It's getting kind of ratty. I'm just about ready to replace it because it's getting pretty beat up, but it works fine. But it's not perfect either. It's absolutely necessary to have this whenever you're pressing whistle motors, because I'm pressing to 7,000 psi, and without a tube support, the tubes will just split open and crush. So you absolutely have to have a tube support. This tool is an older version. This was for the old style of New England paper towel tubes, and the new style has a little bit extra clearance. It's a little bit smaller in diameter, so there's too much room there. So the way I fix that, I take a piece of 3-inch wide gum tape and I just stick it around the motor. I don't stick it to it, I just put it around it, put it inside and it grabs it nice and tight. Close it up and it's not going anywhere. I can't push it in or out. It's exactly how I want it. Now, this problem will go away once I get a new tube support. But one of the problems all tube supports that I've seen have is the fact that these holes here that the bolts go through have a shank. There's some clearance in there, and you need clearance. But what happens is whenever you put them together, one side can be shifted down and the other side shifted up, and it's not much. I'm betting that's maybe 5-7 thousandths of an inch. It's not much. But what happens if this is shifted out to the max, I'm going to line up the bottom here, it's on center. What happens is that spindle, I don't know if I can get that on camera, but that spindle isn't perfectly lined up with the center. I can rack it the other direction. Let's see here. And it's racked the opposite direction. And I can square it up by facing it up on the bottom, but it moves back and forth. And what happens is you'll have your tube support on there, and you go to press, and the first two rammers work fine. You get to your third rammer and you go to slide it down on, and it hits the top of the spindle, which is no good, obviously. And what happens is if you keep forcing it, it'll actually bend your spindle to one side. So that's an issue you have to watch out for. What I do when I line up my spindles, and this is mostly for the black powder spindles because they're longer and they're thinner at the top, so they're more likely to bend. Not that they bend easy. They're stainless steel. They're pretty tough. So I got my tube and the tube support, and I kind of generally try and face it up as good as I can, and I lightly snug it. Not super tight. I just leave it loose for right now. My tubes have a little lip on the inside edge from whenever they were cut. I usually just take my spindle and I just run it along that burr. And now, whenever I put the spindle in, it fits in nice and tight. And it slides in without folding the edges over. Sorry, the camera's shaking a little bit. I don't have a real good support on it. Now, what I do to make sure that it's straight is I take the last hollow rammer that I have, and I slide it down in until it just slides over the spindle, until it just hits, and then I back it off a little bit. With that down and cinched tight around the spindle, it's now holding the tube support square. So I just tap on both sides, and I know that I'm down square onto the base. Then I'm free to tighten it up, and I know it's going to be square. If I had to change anything on these tube supports, it would be that they would have indicator pins that would lock this in perfectly square and then mill the bottom off so that everything is dead nuts perfectly square. Every time you close it, it's going to be perfectly square. All right, now I'm not pressing a black powder motor, so I'm just going to set this aside. I'm not going to need these. All right, so one of the other tools that I have here is a pressure to force gauge, and these are set up so that they have a pressing area of 1 square inch. So whatever pressure is red here is the actual force being applied to the actual pressure to force gauge. And I just leave that here. Sometimes I pull it out once the pressure's set, but I just leave it on there. It doesn't really hurt anything. The next thing is the whole press itself. When you're pressing whistle motors, you have to have this Lexan Shield. You have to. If something would happen in there, you put the wrong rammer in and you pinch the comp, it's very likely to ignite and explode. You need something here between you and your rocket to protect yourself. And this, yeah, it's not going to protect you from burns, because obviously flames can come out from around it. But it's going to protect you from flying metal. It's going to stop this, or at least stop it enough that it's not going to hurt you real bad. It's not going to take your head off. All right. The next thing, setting the pressure. I'm going to turn this up a little bit. If you see back in the back here, there's a knob. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but you can turn this. Whenever I'm not using this, I turn it out so that I have to set it every time. I set it once whenever I first start pressing a motor, and then I forget about it. It's set. And for this particular motor, I know that 3,200 psi on my gauge here gives me 7,000 pounds on the composition. So that's what I'm going to be setting it to, and I'm going to set it once I start pressing my motor. The next thing I want to talk about, I had a block of wax. These spindles, yes, you can press your motors without wax on them. They get sticky. They'll get stuck inside the motor, and it's hell trying to get them out. I know you can see marks on here where I've stuck my channel locks on this to grab it, to get them to spin off. There's no flat spots on this base, so there's nothing really to grab onto, and you're left having to use something like your channel locks. To avoid any issues with that, you just take your wax. This is just regular canning wax, right out of the box, and I wax the spindle. I rub it all over the spindle, everywhere, till it gets dull. Little on the end, a little bit around the base, and I try and leave chunks. I don't know if I can get that on camera there. Not really. I try and leave chunks sitting there on the base, and the reason for that is it makes the aperture of the motor nice and smooth and glossy. It just looks nice, and that's just a preference. I'm going to put this in my tube. Just double check that I'm tight. Yeah, I tightened it. Good enough. My first rammer is ready. I'm going to set the others aside. Now this is the fuel that I made the other day in making potassium benzoate whistle fuel. And I'm going to start pressing. I use it for my 3/4, my 1 pound rocket motors. I use 1 teaspoon increments. This is a metal spoon. You can use plastic. You can, but if you're using a metal funnel, you want to use a plastic spoon. If you're using a metal spoon, you want to use a plastic funnel. Never both metal. There's not really any danger of causing any sparks or anything metal to plastic. So, all right, I'm going to get started. There's 1 increment. I'll put my rammer in. Now I already marked it. I know this is my no pass line. This is so I know whenever it's full. Whenever I get to the top of the spindle, I'm going to meet right there. I kind of lift this up and down a couple times to make sure it levels the fuel inside the motor. Now, as soon as you're done with your fuel, done loading your increment, I take a hemisphere, stick it right over the top, and I set the fuel aside. That way, if something would happen in here, no sparks are going to go in there. One thing I neglected to mention, when you load this into your press, put the seam for the tube support facing you. If you put it facing to your left or right, and this thing would blow, it's going to send this piece right into your face. Even though there's a shield here, it's just an extra safety step. If you turn it to the side and this thing blows, it's going to send the 2 halves opposite directions to your left and right. It's not going to be heading towards you. Okay. Now my pressure is reading 2,000 pounds. I know that I want 3,200 pounds. So I'm going to hold the button in and turn the knob. Okay, there's 3,200 pounds. Another thing that it's not really a big deal, but my charger is back here. My battery is below the desk. The pump is below the desk. But my plug is up here in this corner. And I don't want this charger running whenever I'm pressing. It's just an electrical device. If there was a short in here or something, I don't want sparks to come and hit the motor and possibly ignite something. I'm going to tilt this up just a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I just don't want any possible ignition source getting to the motor. So I unplug it and I plug it in after I'm done pressing. And I leave it charge. Now, I have my first increment pressed. This is a spindle or a rammer removal tool. It comes with it. I shake it a little bit to get any comp that might be stuck in the rammer to fall down in there. And this is nice and clean right now, but oftentimes you'll get composition stuck on the inside of this tube here. And you want to take, I usually use an old rocket stick. This is a big one here right now, but I stick a big rocket stick in there. And just going around the outside edge there is usually enough, and you can kind of tap it and get the dust to fall out. But nothing stuck here. So I'm going to continue using it. One increment at a time. Cover up my fuel. One of the things that I do that isn't maybe necessary, but I do anyway, is I leave a little bit of dwell time on my rocket motors. Whenever it's down to full force and pressing, I just continue holding that button in just to make sure that it gives time for any air that's trapped in the composition to find its way out, and for the fuel to settle down a little bit more. Whistle fuel isn't usually a big deal, but black powder motors, I like to give it some dwell time. My rammer's still nice and clear. Another thing that you may notice is I got my my control slung over the top of the press and hanging down in front of my face. I don't want it on the table, because what I found that one of the bad habits that I had was I'd continue holding it in my hand, and then with that same hand I'd go to put it into the motor into the press. And I didn't want my hand to be back there and have any chance of this turning on. So by hanging it here, I'm kind of forced to let go so that I can refill the motor and put it back in its place. Rammer's still nice and clean. Still nice and clean. I have another 1/2 inch to fill it up before I can switch rammers. And that's one thing I really like about these economy spindles, is that you only have one hollow rammer to fill it up. After that, it's a solid rammer. The motors are nice and short, and they're quick to make. You can hand ram with them as long as you're using black powder. Oh, there's a little bit sticking in there. All good. Cover up my fuel. Sometimes I'll tap this on the table just to make sure the fuel settles down right. I think I'm going to need one more increment before I can switch my rammer. Perfect. I'm right at my no pass line, or my change rammer line. Perfect. Now, I'm going to dump out any excess here. I can just see the tip of the spindle in here. And I am going to be, I weighed out 50 grams of the same fuel, and I added 5 grams of titanium mesh into it. I didn't mix it up yet. I'm just going to do it here in this hemisphere. Dump it back and forth between 2 hemispheres until it's nice and mixed up. And what this is it's going to be my delay fuel. Doesn't have to be perfectly mixed. Titanium it'll distribute fine. Okay, let me put this back in my container. And it's ready to use. You don't have to mix the titanium in the fuel when you make the fuel. It's fine being distributed afterwards, after it's granulated. So I don't get confused, I'm going to set my normal fuel aside and use my delay fuel in its place. And I need to switch rammers. Maybe I can turn that down a little bit. And I apologize, everything in the camera is flip-flopped. Everything is being read backwards. And I can't seem to figure out how to fix that on the camera. But here's my solid rammer. Here is my delay fuel. And I am looking to this line is my no pass line. It's when this rammer face sets down onto the spindle. That's the top of the support. So when I put this in, okay, right now I'm about 3/4 of an inch above the spindle. When I press it, you'll see it crush down. It'll probably be about 3/8 above the spindle. I'm looking for at least 1.5 times the tube diameter of delay on this particular rocket motor. I have to fix the camera again. It normally doesn't take me this long to press a motor. I'm just explaining everything. Give it a little tap on the table just to level the fuel. My fuel container is covered. So 2 increments gives me about 1 tube diameter. So 1 more increment should be enough for this motor. Fuel is covered. And the motor is done. Take the support out. Okay, now you can see I'm 1.5 tube diameters of delay on top of this spindle. So I'm going to remove my rammer, dump out any excess fuel, and I can set my fuel aside. Now, what I usually do on these particular motors is I just grab the base, get a little turn on it before I loosen up the support. I don't want to remove this before I take the support off, because the support is actually pushing in all directions on that tube, and I don't want the fuel grain to have the chance to push in towards the center of the to push into the core if you remove this. So all I do is I get this to turn, and then I loosen up my support. Now there's this handy hole here. There's one on each side. You just use it to pry this open. Now I've never had luck with it, but many people can just pull their motor out, but mine never does that, ever. So I give it a little tap and I can pull my motor out. I'm hoping that once I get a new support using the correct diameter for these tubes, that problem will go away. But so far I haven't ever been able to get it to work right. Now I'm going to remove the spindle gently and see if I can. That motor is pressed and it's got a nice sheen to it because I left a little bit of wax sitting on the base here, and it looks beautiful. Now I have, see, it looks like the belly is about right here. So I have all this space here now that I can fill up with whatever I want. In fact, I'm going to fill it up right now with some of my whistle fuel as a report, because later on tonight I'm going to go out and launch this. Alright, I'll leave a little bit of space in the top of the motor